Welcome to our deep dive into Mark Twain's adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We're going to explore this American classic through a collection of scholarly essays and excerpts from the novel itself.
Oh, cool.
You're in for a treat because you love getting to the heart of complex topics.
Yeah.
We've distilled these diverse perspectives into key insights you won't forget.
All right.
You ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so to start.
Well, as you know, it's more than just an adventure story.
Right.
Huck Finn is often called the first great American novel, and for good reason.
Yeah.
It grapples with themes of race freedom and hypocrisy in ways that are still relevant today.
And to think it all started as a burlesque detective story. Yeah. It's hard to imagine Huck with a magnifying glass and a deerstalker hat instead of a raft and a fishing pole, right?
Twain's journey to creating this masterpiece is fascinating in itself. It speaks to his evolution as a writer and his willingness to tackle challenging subjects. But let's start with the voice of Huck Finn itself, which, as you know, is a prime example of an unreliable narrator.
Right, so we're seeing everything through the eyes of a young boy with a limited understanding of the world. What's interesting is how Twain highlights this unreliability through language.
Exactly. One essay compares Huck's description of the Mississippi River at dawn to a passage from Twain's own life on the Mississippi.
Okay.
Huck talks about streaks on the water and dead fish laying around, while Twain crafts a beautifully enchanting and tranquil scene.
So it's like hearing two completely different perspectives on the same thing.
Exactly.
And it makes you realize that Huck's simplicity isn't just about his age. It's a deliberate choice by Twain to make us question everything we're reading.
That's a great observation. This contrast forces us to read between the lines and consider the deeper implications of Huck's naivete. It adds a whole new dimension to the story.
And speaking of adding dimensions, let's talk about Pap Finn Huck's abusive father.
Oh, yeah.
He's such a vividly drawn character, both pathetic and terrifying.
One essay analyzes the scene where Huck tries to protect his money by selling it to Judge Thatcher for $1. What's fascinating is how this scene reveals a certain hypocrisy in even the most respected figures.
I'm not sure I follow. Thatcher was just trying to help Huck, wasn't he?
On the surface, yes. But if you look closer, his willingness to accept the money, knowing it's poder, Huck's attempt to hide it from his father, reveals a certain self-serving nature. It makes you question the motives of those in power, even those who appear benevolent.
So Huck is surrounded by adults who are letting him down, either through abuse or through a more subtle form of self-interest. It's no wonder he relies on his own judgment.
Exactly. This recurring theme of adult hypocrisy plays a crucial role in Huck's moral development. He's forced to navigate a world where the lines between right and wrong are constantly blurred.
Okay, and then there's Jim, the runaway slave who becomes Huck's companion. What strikes me is that Jim is not a stereotypical caricature. He's a fully realized person with hopes and fears, just like anyone else.
You're absolutely right. And Twain uses humor to highlight Jim's intelligence and the systemic injustices he faces. Remember those anecdotes about Jim's failed attempts at financial speculation, the cow that dies and the slave-run bank that goes bust?
Yes. It's hilarious, but it also makes you think about the limited opportunities available to Black people, even those who are supposedly free.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even when slaves tried to participate in the American dream, the system was rigged against them.
Yeah.
And there's another layer of irony. Jim ultimately gains freedom through Miss Watson's will, showing that legal manumission doesn't necessarily translate to true liberation from societal constraints.
It makes you wonder what true freedom really means in a society still grappling with the legacy of slavery.
Yeah. This question of freedom is deeply intertwined with the novel's setting, the Mississippi River. As you know, the river serves as more than just a backdrop for Huck and Jim's adventures.
Well, it's almost like a character in itself, right?
Exactly.
It represents both escape and danger, freedom and constraint.
One essay describes this as the river's dual nature. It offers a path to escape from civilization, but it also presents unpredictable currents and dangerous encounters.
It reminds me of the complexities of American identity itself. The promise of freedom often clashes with the realities of inequality and injustice.
That's a great connection. The river becomes a microcosm of the larger societal forces at play in Huckleberry Finn.
And speaking of societal forces, we can't ignore Twain's biting satire, particularly in his portrayal of the mob mentality.
Right.
The Bricksville episode with the shooting of Boggs and the subsequent chaos is a prime example.
It's like watching a dark comedy unfold. One essay points out how Twain uses the structure of a three-act play to heighten the satire, taking us from horror to absurd entertainment to religious fervor, all within a few days.
It's a pretty bleak commentary on how easily people can be swayed by emotion and manipulated by those in power.
Absolutely. It's a theme that runs throughout the novel. Remember when Colonel Sherburne confronts the lynch mob?
Well,
That scene is chilling, especially when you consider that Twain himself witnessed a lynching as a young boy.
it's a stark reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of American society, a darkness that Twain was determined to expose through his writing.
And this brings us to the novel's controversial ending, where Tom Sawyer returns and orchestrates this elaborate escape for Jim, who we learn is already free.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a moment that's left readers scratching their heads for generations. Some argue that it undermines the novel's anti-slavery message, while others see it as a final act of biting satire.
One critic argues that the entire ending with Tom's ridiculous scheme is a massive deadpan joke.
Okay.
By making it so outlandish, Twain is exposing the absurdity of how white society views Black liberation.
So instead of seeing Tom as a clueless jerk, we should see him as a vehicle for Twain's satire.
Exactly.
It's like he's saying, look how ridiculous these notions of white paternalism are.
Exactly. And the fact that Jim plays along adds another layer of complexity. Is he truly powerless, or is he protecting himself by playing a role? It's a question that Twain leaves open for the reader to ponder.
It's a brilliant but uncomfortable way to end the novel. And it makes you wonder, is Huck complicit in this charade, or is he starting to see through Tom's foolishness?
That's a great question. We need to look closer at what some scholars call Huck's crisis of whiteness to understand his role in this final act.
I remember that scene with the raftsman where Huck tries to fit in by using a phrase that sounds like Black English and ends up being threatened with violence. It's a moment where he's forced to confront his own racial identity.
And it's a moment that reflects Twain's own complex and evolving views on race.
Yeah.
Huck Finn is both a product of its time containing racist language and a critique of it exposing the absurdity of racial prejudice.
It's a tightrope walk for sure, but it's what makes Huckleberry Finn such a challenging and enduring work of literature. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our history.
Absolutely. And it also forces us to consider the historical and economic context in which it was written. This was just a few decades after the Civil War, and the wounds of slavery were still very raw.
Plus, there's the whole economic reality of the Mississippi River itself.
Right.
One essay argues that Twain saw the river not just as a symbol of freedom, but also as a conduit for economic exploitation, particularly through the slave trade.
That's a crucial point. The river represents both the allure of adventure and the dark underbelly of American history. It's a place where fortunes were made on the backs of enslaved people.
And that same essay also connects the antebellum slave trade to the later push for American imperialism.
Oh, wow.
It's like Twain is saying that the desire to exploit and dominate others never really went away. It just took on different forms.
It's a chilling thought,
Yeah.
but it makes Huckleberry Finn even more relevant today as we grapple with the legacies of colonialism and racial injustice.
It's definitely not just a story about a boy in a raft. It's a story about America itself, warts and all. And speaking of warts, we have to talk about Pap Finn again. He's such a disturbing character, but also a complex one.
What's fascinating about Pap is that he represents a certain type of white poverty that was prevalent in the South during that era. He's resentful of those he perceives as more successful, and he takes out that resentment on Huck.
I remember that scene where he goes on a drunken rant about a free nigger he encountered who was educated and well-dressed. It's a chilling reminder of the deep-seated racism that fueled so much violence and oppression.
And it's a reminder that poverty and ignorance can be exploited to further divide people and maintain systems of power. Pap is both a perpetrator and a victim of those systems.
Which makes his character all the more tragic and unsettling.
Mhm.
And it makes you wonder what would have happened to Huck if he had stayed with Pap.
That's a question that haunts the novel. Huck's escape from Pap is both physical and psychological. He's breaking free from a cycle of abuse, but he's also venturing into a world that is full of its own dangers and contradictions.
It's like he's on the cusp of manhood, trying to figure out who he is and what he believes in.
And that journey of self-discovery is intertwined with his relationship with Jim, which brings us to the heart of the novel, Jim's quest for freedom.
Jim's journey is both literal and symbolic, isn't it? He's trying to escape physical bondage, but he's also searching for something more profound, a sense of self-worth and agency in a society that has denied him those basic rights.
You're right. And what's striking is that Jim isn't just passive in this quest.
Right.
He's resourceful, intelligent, and often acts as Huck's moral compass.
Yes, he challenges Huck's prejudices and helps him to see the world in a new way. But then we have that ending with Tom's ridiculous scheme, which is almost heartbreaking.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained racism and paternalism were, even in supposedly well-intentioned efforts to help Black people.
And brings us back to that question of what true freedom looks like for Jim and for all Black people in America. Is it just about escaping bondage, or does it require a deeper societal transformation?
That's the million-dollar question. And Twain, as always, doesn't offer easy answers. He leaves it to the reader to grapple with the complexities of race, freedom, and justice.
It's a legacy that continues to resonate today as we face ongoing struggles for racial equality and social justice.
Absolutely. Huckleberry Finn may be set in the past, but its themes are timeless and universal. It's a story that forces us to look inward to examine our own biases and assumptions.
And speaking of looking inward, one of the things that really impressed me was how Twain explores the power of language in the novel. I'm thinking of that scene where Huck tries to convince Jim that they didn't really encounter any kings.
Ah, yes. That's classic Twain, using humor to expose the absurdity of social hierarchies. Huck, in his attempt to comfort Jim, basically says that kings are just regular folks.
Yeah.
But Jim points out the very real differences in how they live and are treated.
It's like he's saying there's a big difference between claiming that everyone's equal and actually living in a society where that's true.
Exactly. Twain is highlighting how language can be used to justify inequality and maintain systems of power. It's a reminder to be critical thinkers, to question assumptions, and to challenge those who use words to manipulate others.
It's a powerful message, especially in today's world where misinformation and propaganda are so prevalent.
And it speaks to Twain's democratic ethos.
Yeah.
One essay argues that he was celebrating a kind of everyday vernacular language that was accessible to everyone.
It's like he's saying that everyone's story is worth telling regardless of their social status or education.
And that's why Huckleberry Finn, for all its complexity and controversy, continues to speak to readers today. It challenges us to question authority, to embrace empathy, and to imagine a more just and equitable world.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It makes you think about the world differently.
Now your deep dive has been all about understanding Huckleberry Finn on a deeper level and appreciating its enduring relevance.
Yeah, we've covered so much ground from satire and unreliable narration to the complexities of race and freedom.
But there's one question that I think is worth pondering as you continue to think about this novel.
Okay, all ears.
Given Huck's ultimate decision to light out for the territory, can we view him as a character who rejects society's constraints? Or is he simply running away from the complexities of moral responsibility?
Wow, that's a tough one. Is Huck a rebel or a runaway? Is he forging his own path based on his own values? Or is he just avoiding the hard work of confronting injustice?
It's a question that each reader has to answer for themselves.
It's what makes great literature so rewarding.
Absolutely.
It stays with us, challenges us, and makes us think.
And that's what makes this deep dive so valuable. You've gained a deeper understanding of Huckleberry Finn, and you're equipped to continue exploring its depths on your own.
I feel like I've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover.
There's always more to discover in a work as rich and complex as Huckleberry Finn.
It's a book that will keep me thinking for a long time to come.
And that's the beauty of it. It's a story that continues to resonate and provoke discussion long after you've finished reading it.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, this was good.
Tune in next time for part 2.
All right, sounds good.
See ya.
Bye. It feels like we're really starting to peel back the layers of Huck Finn.
Yeah.
You know, last time we were talking about Jim's quest for freedom and how that intersects with Huck's moral development.
Right.
To fully understand all that, we really have to dive into the historical and economic context of this novel.
Okay.
So, Huck Finn was published in 1885.
Right.
Just a few decades after the Civil War.
The wounds of slavery and racial division were still very raw.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate the courage it took for Twain to tackle these issues so directly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also can't forget about the economic realities of that era, especially along the Mississippi River. One essay points out that Twain saw the river not just as the symbol of freedom, but also as a conduit for economic exploitation.
Oh, wow.
The Mississippi was the backbone of the Southern economy. And that economy was built on the backs of enslaved people.
That's a good point.
And this essay makes this really interesting connection between the antebellum slave trade and this later push for American imperialism.
Okay.
It's like Twain is suggesting that this desire to exploit and to dominate others, it didn't just disappear after the Civil War, it just took on new forms.
That's a sobering thought. But it really helps us understand the broader implications of Huck and Jim's journey. They're navigating a world that was shaped by centuries of injustice.
And that brings us back to the question of Huck's moral growth.
Yeah.
He's constantly wrestling with his conscience,
Right.
trying to reconcile his own prejudices
Yeah.
with this growing empathy he has for Jim.
It's that internal struggle that makes Huck such a compelling character.
Yeah.
He's not a perfect hero, he's flawed, he's conflicted,
Right.
but he's also capable of such compassion.
And that's what makes his relationship with Jim so powerful.
Yeah.
It really forces him to confront his beliefs and to start seeing the world through a different lens.
Yeah. Speaking of different lenses, one of the things that really stood out to me in these readings was how Twain uses satire
Oh, yeah.
to expose the hypocrisy of society.
Yeah.
He really doesn't hold back.
No, he doesn't. From the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons to the Duke and the Dauphin, he
Wow.
skewers everyone,
Right.
regardless of social status.
I'm thinking about that scene where the Duke and Dauphin are putting on their ridiculous Shakespearean play. It's so funny.
It's hilarious.
But it also reveals this deeper truth about human nature.
Exactly. Twain is showing how easily people can be fooled by appearances,
Right.
how quickly they can be swept up in a con.
It makes you think about the ways in which we're all susceptible to manipulation, especially when it comes from those in positions of authority.
And that's where the power of satire really lies. It allows Twain to expose these truths in a way that's entertaining and thought-provoking.
Right. It's like he's holding a mirror up to society,
Yes.
forcing us to see our own flaws.
And speaking of mirrors, let's go back to the Mississippi River for a minute. We talked about its economic significance. We talked about its symbolic power.
Right.
I think it's also worth considering how the river reflects the characters themselves.
Oh, I like that.
You know, the river is constantly changing, just like Huck and Jim are constantly evolving.
Yeah, the river's twists and turns,
Yeah.
its calm stretches, and its raging rapids.
Uh-huh.
They all mirror the emotional journey that Huck and Jim are undergoing.
Exactly. It's like the river is a metaphor
Yeah.
for the uncertainties of life, the unpredictable nature of fate.
Which brings us back to that question of whether Huck is really rejecting society's constraints or simply running away from responsibility.
Yeah. That's a question that continues to spark a lot of debate among scholars and readers.
I see Huck as this character who's caught between two worlds.
Okay.
He's yearning for freedom,
Yeah.
but he's also so burdened by the weight of his past
Right.
and the expectations of society.
I think that's a very nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the complexity of Twain's creation. Huck's not a simple character.
No.
He's full of contradictions and ambiguity.
Just like the river he's traveling on.
Precisely. And that's what makes Huck Finn such a powerful and enduring work of literature. It challenges us to think critically, to question assumptions,
Yeah.
and embrace the messy realities of human experience.
And it does so with this combination of humor and pathos
Right.
and a deep understanding of the human heart.
Which brings us to another key aspect of this novel, the power of language.
Yeah.
Twain was a master of using language to
Ah.
create vivid characters
Right.
and these really memorable scenes.
I remember that scene where Pap goes on this drunken rant
Oh, yeah?
about a free nigger he encountered who was educated and well-dressed. The language that he uses is so raw and hateful. It's chilling.
That scene is just this stark reminder of the deep-seated racism that was so prevalent in American society during this era.
But Twain also uses language to subvert those racist stereotypes.
Oh, absolutely.
He gives Jim a voice. He allows him to express his thoughts and feelings in a way that challenges those prevailing views of Black people.
Exactly. And he does so through Jim's dialect,
Right.
which is both authentic to the time period
Right.
and subtly subversive.
I remember that conversation between Huck and Jim
Ugh.
about Solomon the Biblical King.
Right.
Huck tries to explain why splitting the baby in half isn't a good idea,
Yeah.
but Jim uses his own logic to argue that Solomon wasn't all that wise.
It's a hilarious scene, but it also really highlights Jim's intelligence
Yeah.
and his ability to think critically.
It makes you realize that Twain isn't just using dialect for comedic effect.
Right.
He's using it to challenge our assumptions about who deserves to be heard and whose stories are actually worthy of being told.
And that's a radical idea, especially for a writer who was working in the late 19th century.
It speaks to Twain's democratic spirit, his belief that everyone's voice matters.
And it also connects to this novel's larger theme of freedom. Jim's quest for physical freedom is intertwined with his quest for intellectual and emotional freedom.
He wants to be seen as a whole person, not just a stereotype.
And Twain, through his use of language, grants him that dignity.
I think that's one of the most important lessons we can take away from Huck Finn. It's a reminder to listen to those voices that are often silenced,
Yeah.
to challenge the narratives that are used to justify inequality, and to embrace the power of language to create a more just and equitable world.
That's a lesson that resonates even more strongly today as we continue to grapple with issues of race, identity, and social justice.
Speaking of social justice,
Yeah.
one of the things that's been on my mind is the way in which Huck Finn has been both celebrated and condemned over the years. It's a book that seems to elicit these strong reactions.
That's because it's a book that doesn't shy away from difficult subjects.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our history.
And those truths can be challenging to process, especially for readers who are coming to the novel with their own preconceived notions about race and racism.
But that's also what makes it such a valuable work of literature.
Yeah.
It sparks conversation, it challenges our thinking,
Right.
and it forces us to engage with the complexities of the world around us.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it. It makes you think differently about the world.
It reminds us that this journey towards justice and equality,
Yeah.
it's a long and winding one, much like the Mississippi River itself.
You know, it's amazing how a book written over a century ago can still feel so relevant today. We're seeing how Huck Finn reflects not just the historical realities of its time, but these ongoing struggles for justice and equality that we're still dealing with.
That's the mark of a truly great work of literature. It transcends its time and place, and it speaks to these universal truths about the human condition.
And it does so with such depth and complexity. You know, we've talked about the river as a symbol, Twain's masterful use of satire, the power of language to shape our perceptions. But what really stands out to me is that ending.
Right.
Huck's decision to light out for the territory has sparked endless debate.
It's a decision that can be interpreted in so many ways.
Yeah.
Is Huck rejecting the hypocrisy of society, or is he just simply running away from his problems?
Yeah, is he a rebel or a runaway?
Exactly.
I've been going back and forth on this myself. On the one hand, you could see it as a hopeful gesture. You know, Huck is striking out on his own. He's determined to make his own way in the world, free from the constraints of a society he no longer believes in.
He's seen firsthand the corruption and injustice that permeate so-called civilized society.
Right.
He's encountered violence, greed, and prejudice at every turn.
And remember, he's just a boy.
Exactly.
He's had to grow up so fast, relying on his instincts and his own moral compass to guide him.
Which makes his decision to light out for the territory all the more significant. He's choosing to escape those corrupting influences and forge his own path.
But then there's that other side of the coin. You know, is he really rejecting society, or is he just avoiding the hard work of confronting his problems?
It's a question that each reader has to wrestle with. And I think it's a question that Twain intentionally leaves unanswered.
Yeah.
He's not giving us a tidy resolution. He's challenging us to think for ourselves.
Which is what makes Huck Finn such a powerful and thought-provoking work of literature. It doesn't offer easy answers. It forces us to grapple with ambiguity and complexity.
And that's ultimately what makes it so relevant to our lives today.
Yeah.
We're still grappling with those same issues of race, freedom, and justice.
Right.
We're still trying to figure out how to create a more equitable and humane society.
And just like Huck, we're all on a journey navigating the twists and turns of life, trying to find our own way.
That journey may not always be easy, and it may not always lead us to the answers we're seeking. But it's the journey itself that matters. It's the process of questioning, challenging, and growing that really shapes who we are.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think it captures the essence of Huck Finn. It's a book about the journey, not the destination. It's a book about learning, growing, and striving to be better, even when the world around us seems determined to hold us back.
And it's a book that reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of redemption, of change, of a better future.
I think that's a message we can all take to heart. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. We hope you've gained some new insights into this complex and enduring work of literature, and that you'll continue to explore its depths on your own. Until next time, happy reading.